In this video, we're going to talk about the first superhero team of the Silver Age, and there are a lot of key first appearances in that run. Coming up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hey there, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. Before we get started, please like, comment, subscribe. It helps the algorithm, and I really appreciate everyone who has watched and supported the channel. If you like the content, just click on the subscription button, give us a thumbs up, and leave a comment. Also, follow us on other socials, Bronzeville_comics on Instagram, also Bronzeville_comics on Whatnot. We do sales every Monday night at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you're not yet signed on with Whatnot, you can use the link in the description of this video and get $10 off your first purchase. Also, in the description of this video is a link to my eBay store and my email. So if you have any questions or, if I have books that I've come across that I might be willing to part with, not the ones I'm going to talk about here, hit me up. We may be able to make a deal. So, today we're going to talk about the first superhero team of the Silver Age. It's not the Avengers or the X-Men or the Justice League. It is the Legion of Superheroes. Now, caveat, the Challengers of the Unknown premiered in 1957, the year before the Legion of Superheroes, but Challengers are not superheroes, so the Legion was the first superhero team. And it is a team with a ton of members and a lot of first appearances and a lot of early Silver Age first appearances, as we will talk about here. Now, the idea of the Legion of Superheroes was it was an offshoot of Superboy and eventually became a backup to Superboy in Adventure Comics. Basically, Superboy would travel 1,000 years into the future, into a very utopian future, a very hopeful future, much similar in thought to Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, that the future held great promise. And in the future, we have the United Planets, and there are teenagers who've been inspired by Superboy, who began as a teenager fighting crime as a superhero, and they have band together to do it themselves. Long continuity, long history, somewhat convoluted. Now, we're going to talk about the first appearances of the pre-crisis characters, the pre-crisis members of the Legion of Superheroes. It gets a lot more convoluted as we go forward, as characters were reimagined. Now, we have seen a Legion of Superheroes animated series. It ran for 2 seasons on, I believe it was Cartoon Network. There's also been an animated film. They have had appearances in live action on television. They did appear in Smallville. There were a few members that appeared on the Supergirl TV series and some other members that have appeared elsewhere. But let's begin by talking about the first appearance of the members. And we're going to go chronologically by appearance. Now, the first member of the Legion of Superheroes to appear well before the Legion of Superheroes, because you needed him first, was Superboy, who made his first appearance in More Fun Comics number 101, cover dated January-February 1945. Now, is it truly the first appearance of a character? Because Superboy, in those days, were the adventures of Superman as a boy. It was the teenage Superman. Actually, in the very early issues, he was probably a preteen. He was a little bit younger. But by the time we got into the mid-1950s, he was a teenager. Now, the most common grade of More Fun 101 is a 7.0. The last sale for a 7.0 was in January of 2022 for $7,800. And the last sale in any grade was a 4.5 that sold back in December for $3,720. So it's about $1,000 a grade point for that book. And it is a huge key. Superboy was one of the few characters that survived from the Golden Age through until the Silver Age. Had his own comic and also appeared in More Fun. And then when More Fun became a Funny Animals book, Superboy, along with other features, Aquaman, Green Arrow, Johnny Quick, went over to Adventure Comics. And that's where Superboy stayed for many years. The next appearance, it's a triple first appearance, and it's a first appearance of the team. This is a mega key. It is Adventure Comics 247 that came out in April of 1958. And just think about how early that is in the Silver Age. 1958, just less than 2 years after Barry Allen's first appearance in Showcase number 4. Most common grade of this book is a 2.5 that has a fair market value, according to Go Collect, of $1,750. In May, however, a 2.5 copy sold for $2,200. And a 6.5 in December on Comic Connect sold for $7,022. So we're looking at probably about $1,000 a grade point, somewhat similar to the Superboy book. Actually, a friend of the channel reached out to me recently. He got a copy of this book, a low-grade copy, mind you, at an antique store for $5. So that was an excellent pickup. Good for you. I'm obviously extremely jealous, but, you know, I never deny somebody else's joy in getting a great book. So, now the next character also appeared outside of continuity, or outside of the Legion continuity, I should say, and that is Supergirl. This also is a mega key. Her first appearance in Action Comics 252, which came out in May of 1959. She would eventually join the Legion in 270 in Action Comics 276, which is a book we'll talk about in a few moments. This book, a 3.0, has a fair market value according to Go Collect of $1,900. There were 2 sales of a 3.0 in February, one for $1,381, the other for $1,900, so quite a wide variety there. There are 4 9.2 copies, none higher, and the last sale of a 9.2 of Action 252 was back in 2015 for $45,000. Big key. Obviously, these, you know, books from the 1950s are so rare in high grade. Once you get into higher grade, it's a premium. We're talking probably about, what, $500 or so per grade point on this book. But obviously that is going to increase exponentially when you get into the high grades and the very rare high grades. Now, the next key issue doesn't have any first appearances. If the first appearance of the Legion, Adventure 247, was a book that had an iconic cover. However, the characters to modern audiences or audiences that are familiar with the Legion aren't really familiar. Their costumes are different. Lightning Lad is referred to as Lightning Boy. The second appearance of the Legion in Adventure Comics 267 from December of 1959. So there was a 1.5 year gap between their first appearance and their second appearance. A 6.5 of that sold for $395 in April. There are 2 9.4s on the census, none higher. One sold in 2020 for $6,300. And it's the same 3 Legionnaires that appear. No new ones. It's Lightning Lad, Cosmic Boy, and Saturn Girl. And they have costumes that were basically the blueprint of their costumes throughout the Silver Age. The Legion, partially inspired by fan contributions. A lot of the art done by Dave Cockrum and Mike Grell in the 1970s had a lot of costume changes, updated them, and the females wore a lot less clothing at that time than they did in the 1960s. Now, let's go to a book that has multiple first appearances of Legionnaires, and that's a book that came out in August of 1960. It is Action Comics 267, which had the first appearances of Chameleon Boy, Colossal Boy, and Invisible Kid. Now, the Legionnaires, often their names pretty much told you what their powers were. You know, Cosmic Boy has magnetic powers. Saturn Girl has telepathic powers. She can read minds. And Lightning Lad has lightning powers. Chameleon Boy can change shape. He can take on any shape. He's a shapeshifter. And he predates the Skrulls. Colossal Boy can get really big. And Invisible Kid can become invisible. A 7.0 has a fair market value of about $300, and there was a sale in December for $288 of this book. Now, I'm talking partially about this because in the new DCU, Is it possible we could see the Legionnaires appear? It is. But it would be interesting to see how they handle it, given the fact that their adventures take place 1,000 years in the future. In kind of fantastical 1960s comic books, even 1950s comic books, the reader could suspend a lot of disbelief. Now, modern audiences and modern movie audiences are a little more jaded, so it would be kind of an interesting trick to see how they incorporate them. But these are such great characters and such iconic characters, it would be hard to ignore them. The next first appearance was a character who appeared in a story not in Legion continuity, and that is Starboy, whose first appearance was in Adventure Comics 282 in March of 1961. Two grade points have the most sales, a 7.0 and a 3.5. Each have 7 sales. The 7.0 most recently sold in November for $432. The 3.5 almost a year ago in July for just $82. And again, high grade, very rare, very expensive. There are 3 9.4s on the census. One sold in January of 2022 for $6,000. The Starboy, when he premiered, was a character who had powers akin to Superboy, kind of the super strength, etc. But he lost those powers, and he had powers of being able to increase the gravity of an object to make it heavy. I guess draw on the mass of the stars and do that. There have been a lot of star men in DC continuity, and Starboy also was kind of a continuing character in Justice Society, as he had come from the future to the past, and all one of those time travel things that kind of makes your brain hurt when you try to explain it. Up next, a big first appearance book, and this is a quintuple key? No. A sectuple key or heptuple key. It's got a 7-way key continuity. It is the issue. It's Action Comics 276 from May of 1961. Kind of a goofy cover. A lot of these covers, the Legionnaires were the backup stories, so you get kind of these goofy Silver Age Superman, Superboy, Supergirl covers. At any rate, this is where Supergirl joins the Legion, and it's also the first appearance of Triplicate Girl, who could split herself into 3 persons. Later, one of those died, and she became Duo Damsel. Phantom Girl, who has the power of intangibility. That character did appear in, I think it was season 8 of The Flash for no apparent reason. Bouncing Boy, who was really fat and could bounce around. Sunboy, who had heat powers. Shrinking Violet, who could become small, and probably the most popular character to come out of this, Brainiac 5, who had, I think it was 11th level intelligence, and he is a quasi-descendant of the Superman villain, Brainiac. Anyway, Action Comics 276, and I really like this book. 4.5 sold in May for $285. So I also think it's underappreciated, and you're talking about multiple keys, if any of these characters are used. Now, and the other thing is that in movie or TV, much like they did with Phantom Girl and Flash, but that was kind of a throwaway character, and there was no tendrils to connect her. We also saw Phantom Girl, along with Chameleon Boy and Saturn Girl, in the final season of Young Justice. Anyway, they could use those characters outside of Legion continuity, but I, for one, would very much prefer to see them as Legionnaires. So, we're going to go to our next book. And you'll notice that a lot of these books, like this one, say still 10 cents. This is Superboy 89, and it's the first appearance of Mon-El. And this came out in June of 1961. A 7.0 sold in December for $384. There are 3 9.4s with no sales, and there's a 9.2 that sold for $937 in 2013. And one of the interesting things about this book, it came out in June of 1961. That's 5 months before Fantastic Four #1. And just to show you how old these books are, and I think sometimes it gets lost on collectors, these early Silver Age DC books, and it makes them hard to find, are older than the early Marvel Silver Age keys. So, I mean, again, kind of a goofy cover where they're fighting this kind of dual Jack-in-the-Box thing. And it's called Superboy's Big Brother. Guy lands. He has superpowers, much like Superboy. They think he's another Kryptonian. He lands on a Monday, so they call him Mon-El. Superboy, his Kryptonian name of Kal-El. It turns out that he's from the planet Daxam, which imbues their inhabitants under a red sun, Earth's decreased gravity, etc., etc. Essentially the same powers as Superboy. And he, however, not having a weakness to kryptonite, he had a weakness to lead. And on Earth, there's a lot more lead than there is kryptonite. So Superboy, in order to save his life from lead poisoning, had to send him into the Phantom Zone. And he was in the Phantom Zone for 1,000 years, until the 30th century, when he did join the Legion after Brainiac 5 cured him, and he could take on his role with full powers. Now, the next book is another similar character. It is Superboy 98. It's the first appearance of Ultra Boy that came out in July of 1962. 9.0 last sold for $400 back in September 2020. There was a 7.5 sale in May for $600. On the census, there are 4 9.6s, no 9.8s. One of those sold in 2016 for $2,275. Ultra Boy has similar powers to Superboy, but he can only use one at a time. He has to kind of focus himself whether he's going to be invulnerable, have super strength, or what they call Pentravision, which can, I guess, penetrate anything, including lead. So whenever, like, Superboy and Mon-El can't see through lead, they're like, they need Ultra Boy. But then he's got to turn off his invulnerability so he can get harmed at that point. Now, by this point, the Legionnaires were a regular backup feature in Adventure Comics. And in Adventure number 303, we saw the first appearance of another character. That is Matter Eater Lad. Matter Eater Lad. I should digress. Let me say this. In issue number 300, the Legion partially took over the lead in Adventure Comics. Sometimes they're the lead feature, sometimes they're the backup. And that is kind of an iconic Legion book. A 7.0 had a $420 sale back in November. There are 2 9.4s on the census. One sold for $6,600 in 2020. Now, as the Legion airs continued in Adventure Comics 303, first appearance of Matter Eater Lad, December 1962. An 8.5 last sold in January 2021 for $159, and the single 9.6 on the census has never had a recorded sale. Matter Eater Lad, maybe an underappreciated member of the Legion. He can eat anything. So when it comes time to, they need to get through like some rocks or some metal, Matter Eater Lad will eat it. And he is from the planet Bismol, spelled just like the last part of Pepto-Bismol. Kind of a goofy character. He was alluded to in the Peacemaker television series. So obviously James Gunn has an affinity for Matter Eater Lad because he also has an affinity for goofy characters, which Matter Eater Lad definitely qualifies as. The next book that we're going to talk about is Adventure Comics 306. And this is the first appearance of the Legion of Substitute Heroes. There were originally 4 members. I thought there were 5. Night Girl, Polar Lad, Stone Boy, and Chlorophyll Kid. I guess Color Kid, I think, was the 5th that joined later. They were basically a group of folks. They would, in the Adventure Comics run, every once in a while, they would have like tryouts for prospective members, and sometimes they would be silly. Not nearly as silly, maybe, as this Dolly-esque cover, where the jalopy that Ma and Pa Kent are in, like, takes on a life of his own, as did the clock in the courthouse. There's only one way to stop them, but I don't dare try. Anyway, the substitute heroes are in this. Eventually, in Adventure Comics, when was it? It was much later. It was in the 1980s, where Polar Boy, who was always the captain of the Legion of Substitute Heroes, He eventually graduated to become a member of the Legion proper. They always had like some drawbacks. Like Chlorophyll Kid he would make plants grow. Polar Lad had like ice powers. Night Girl had super strength, but only at night. And Stone Boy could turn his body into stone, which was not really the most dynamic of superpowers. The substitute heroes would appear occasionally. They did have their own special in the 80s. They kind of became sort of cult favorites. And we talk about the Legion tryouts. Another character who was a failed Legion, potential Legion member, was Arm Fall Off Boy. And that was the character that Nathan Fillion played in the Suicide Squad film. So James Gunn has used a couple of these characters in present-day properties. Okay, let's move on, because at this point, new characters were coming fast and furious. Adventure Comics 307, April 1963, was the first appearance of Element Lad. He was the sole survivor of a planet, and he could turn anything into any other element. You know, he could turn a rock into hydrogen, or he could turn, a car. Well, they didn't cars. He could turn, a piece of metal into uranium. He could turn anything. So he was actually very powerful. This book, the 307, an 8.5 sold in March for $312. There are two 9.6s on the census. One sold in August of 2021 for $3,360. One interesting note about Element Lad. He was one of the first openly gay superheroes in DC Comics, and I guess he came out in the 1980s. Just an interesting side note. The very next issue, we saw the first appearance of Lightning Lass, who was the twin sister of Lightning Lad. That book came out in May of 1963. A 9.2, which is the most commonly sold grade, most recently sold back in February of 2022 for $264. Just 2 grades higher. There are only 5 9.6s. But in 2012, a 9.6 sold for $1,434. Lightning Lass, eventually her powers changed from lightning powers to Light Lass, where she had the power, kind of the opposite power of Starboy, where she could make any object super light. So, like, a rock would float away, that kind of thing. In Adventure Comics 317, first appearance of Dream Girl, February 1964. A 9.0 sold this past February for $500, and there's only one 9.6, and that has not sold. So that's fairly high for a 9.0, considering, a couple of the books that came out a little bit before this. But Dream Girl was a character that we did see in a version of her on the Supergirl TV series as a semi-regular. Adventure Comics 327 from 1964. That is the first appearance of Timberwolf, who at the time was called Lone Wolf. A character that kind of had a ferocious bestial side and had kind of like enhanced strength and agility, kind of almost like, I guess, feline-like powers. A 9.4 of this book sold in 2021 for $240. There are actually, this book from 1964, there are 4 9.8s. The last sale was in 2019 for $1,560. He did premiere in Adventure 327, but did not join the team until 372. The next character that we will talk about is Magnetic Kid. His first appearance was in Adventure 335 in August of 1965. He would not join the team until Legion of Superheroes Volume 3, number 14, along with a bunch of other folks we'll talk about later. In 1985, a 9.4 sold back in 2021 for $576. There are 2 9.8s. In January, one sold for $1,320. Now, Magnetic Kid is the brother of Cosmic Boy. Eventually, like, he premiered in this, his first appearance was in this issue as like just Cosmic Boy's kid brother. Eventually became a superhero in his own right, joined the Legion, and died. Which was, I guess, to give, a tragic turn of events to Cosmic Boy's story. Because Cosmic Boy has always been one of the main characters and one of the few characters in the Legion that has had his own comic. So that's Magnetic Kid. Now, the next, and this is a big key. July 1966. This is shortly after Jim Shooter, who I think was 13 at the time, took over the writing of the comics. Adventure Comics 346 are the first appearances of Ferrolad, Karate Kid, and Princess Projecta, as well as Nemesis Kid. Nemesis Kid did join the Legion, but he was a turncoat, and he was kicked out. This, a 7.0, most recently sold in May for $299. There are two 9.6s with no sales, a 9.4 sold in 2011 for $657. So I think Ferrolad and Karate Kid, even more than Princess Projecta, very popular characters. Karate Kid was one of those characters that has had his own series. He had that in the 1970s. They kind of sent him back to modern times, and he had, I think it was a 15-issue run. Ferrolad is one of those characters that he died a few issues later fighting the Fatal Five, and he stayed dead. Kind of a tragic character. Interesting note about Ferrolad. According to interviews with Jim Shooter, Ferrolad had a full mask on. Never saw his face. His face was disfigured. But really, what Shooter's intent, teenage Jim Shooter's intent, was to have Ferrolad unmasked and it to turn out that he was African American, which would have been a shock to comic book readers in 1966, where there were very few black characters. But DC was afraid of losing distribution of their books in the South, so Shooter said, okay, I'll just kill him off. Now, the next character to make her first appearance was the White Witch, who is the sister of Dream Girl. She premiered as the Hag. She was kind of used as a foe of the Legion. That was in Adventure Comics 350 from November of 1966. There are 12 9.4s on the census, a $576 sale in March, and there are 6 9.6s, which had a $456 sale back in August of last year. She would not join the team until Legion of Superheroes 294, which I think was 1984. She joined during the Great Darkness saga, and kind of lent the stories at the time sort of that more mystical element. She didn't have the precognitive powers that Dream Girl did. Dream Girl could kind of get visions of the future. But White Witch was a trained sorceress. And so she didn't have the precognitive powers of other individuals from her planet. Adventure Comics 365 in February of 1968 was the first appearance of Shadowless. Now, Shadowless and the next character we're going to talk about were both featured about a year earlier in Adventure Comics 354 in a feature about fallen heroes, characters who had passed away as members of the Legion when Superman went forward in time to visit the Legion and found out information about them as adults. Every once in a while, Superman would have adventures with adult Legionnaires, and in this one, they had kind of the Hall of Heroes. Shadowless wasn't really killed in the comic books, at least as far as I know. She certainly wasn't killed in pre-crisis continuity. What also is working to the advantage of this comic is it has a gorgeous Neil Adams cover. A 9.4 sold for $228 in November. There are 5 9.6s on the census. The last sale of a 9.6 was for $508 back in 2012. Just 7 issues later, in September of 1968, another character who was listed as deceased in Adventure 354 made his first appearance, and that is Chemical King. He had the powers to control chemicals. Another Neil Adams cover, a 9.4 sold for $300 in April. There is a single 9.8 on the census that sold for $1,076 back in 2012. Chemical King later died. I think it was in Superboy 204-ish, as he prevented World War VII. Next is another character who's one of the very popular characters of the Legion in the 1970s and into the 80s, and that is Wildfire, who made his first appearance as Erg-1 in Superboy 195 in June of 1973. Now, you'll notice there's a 5-year gap between Chemical King's first appearance and Wildfire's first appearance. The Legion lost their spot in Adventure Comics, and Supergirl took over the stories there. The Legion became backup features in Action Comics, and they weren't always in there, so they were kind of pushed into the background for quite a bit until they became a backup feature in Superboy, and then in the 1970s, within a few issues of this, the title, if not in the indicia, on the trade dress was Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. So Legion of Superheroes highlighted the book for quite a while. Wildfire did join 7 issues later. A 9.4 of Superboy 195 sold for $125 in May. And there are 13 9.8s on the census. One sold at Heritage Auctions in January for $312. This was a character who, some sort of nuclear energy experiment or something gone awry. He became pure energy, could only be contained by the suit he was in. So it was an interesting character because you never saw a face to the character. It was just this like mask with a black visor. The visor would open and he had to be able to shoot energy out, which I guess was just himself. An interesting character. And as I said, a character who's really popular that they used a lot in the 70s and 80s. The next character is a character they didn't use a lot and was kind of cringy at the time. We couldn't have Pharaoh Lad be African-American, but by 1976, sensibilities had grown a little bit. And in Superboy 216, we saw the first appearance of Tyrock, who had screen powers. He was on an island that only appeared, it was a separate vibrational plane and only had contact with the rest of Earth like once every 10 years, like Brigadoon or something. Now, a 9.4 of this book sold in 2019 for $50. And there's only 9.8 on the census. It has never been publicly sold. Tyrock did join the Legion a couple of issues later, and unfortunately, he's kind of indicative of racially diverse characters in comic books in the 70s that were written and drawn by middle-aged white men. So there is, not really a fully realized character. So another character who also I think may have benefited a little bit more from her first appearance, she's from another planet, but there is definitely a vibe about this character. And it's Superboy 226, the first appearance of Dawnstar. Dawnstar has the ability to fly through the cosmos. Obviously, there is a Native American vibe to the character. This is a book from April of 1977. She joined the team officially 3 issues later, and you'll notice by this time, Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes was on the trade dress of the book. There are no 9.8s of this book, maybe this dark cover. There are 12 9.6s, and the last sale of a 9.6 was for $169 in November. I think that is an interesting character. I'm going to go through the last few characters pretty quick because we're going to be talking about 9.8s of their first appearances. Block, who was, I guess the easiest character to compare him to is the Thing. He was a big stone character. He appeared in Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes 253 in July of 1979. There are 9 9.8s in the census. There was a sale in February for $150. Now we go into the 1980s, where 9.8s will be a little bit easier to find. Invisible Kid 2. The first Invisible Kid died in duty. Jacques Vaucard was Invisible Kid 2, and he was also of African heritage. There are 25 9.8s on the... His first appearance, Legion of Superheroes Annual Number 1 from 1982. That book has 25 9.8s on the census, a $135 sale in January. And then there are 2 more characters that also premiered pre-Crisis in the 1980s. By this time, though, Legion was one of the most popular titles that DC had. I think it was probably right behind New Teen Titans at the time. And along with New Teen Titans, it was one of the first 2 books to get the prestige format direct-only edition. What they did was they started both with New Teen Titans and with Legion of Superheroes. They started a new #1 numbering system. Legion of Superheroes did not have their own title. Volume 1 was a short-lived reprint title in like 1972-73. Volume 2 was, I think it was issued 258. Superboy got kicked out of his own title after 258 issues, started the New Adventures of Superboy, and that book became just Legion of Superheroes. That's your Volume 2. And then what they did was they started to produce, like they had a 1-year gap. So they started to do stories that only came out through the direct market for both New Teen Titans and Legion of Superheroes with a new issue #1. And then they continued parallel. The old Volume 2 became Tales of the Legion of Superheroes, much like New Teen Titans did, which is why that explains the title for the first appearance of Nightwing in Tales of the Teen Titans 44. And then what happened with both those books, after a year, the only new stories you would get were being the direct market edition, and then the Tales of would be reprints of the stories that had been on the direct market a year earlier. So at any rate, Legion of Superheroes, Volume 3, number 9, from April of 1983, is the first appearance of Tellus, who is an alien character. There are only 5 9.8s on the census. The last sale was $47 in 2018. And the final pre-crisis member was Quizlet, who was... there were a lot of new members. This is the issue where Polar Boy joined the team. Some members came back. Some mysterious members were actually other folks that we didn't know about. They had that mystery going on. Quizlet was kind of an unseen alien in a kind of robotic outer casing. And that was in Legion of Superheroes, Volume 3, number 14, September of 1985. There are 4 9.8s on the census. In 2021, one sold for $70. Now, so a lot of those books, especially those two, are books that are easy to find in the wild. It's not a hugely sought-after book. But this video gives you a lot of opportunity to think about and look for some potential keys, some first appearances, going all the way back to the late 1950s and the very early days of the Silver Age. And I think that these books, compared to other first appearances, are really quite affordable. And, you know, they are spec books because there is the possibility that we could see a Legion of Superheroes project developed, and now all of a sudden you have potential dozens of characters that could be used. I didn't even go over some of the villains that were introduced, like the Time Trapper, Universo, or Mordru, some of the unofficial reserve members, which include some of Superboy's friends like Lana Lang and Pete Ross, and also some of the related characters like the Tornado Twins, who are the children of Barry and Iris Allen when they go into the future. Again, all sorts of time travel stuff with Flash. So let me know what you think about these books. Are there any of these books, especially early ones, that you have? Are there any that you want? I know what I want. I definitely want an Adventure 247 at some point in my life. I'm going to keep an eye out for it. In the meantime, thanks for stopping by. You can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.